Joe Biden is standing down. He writes to his fellow Americans, "Over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation." But he says, and I'm not going to read the whole of the letter, but he says in the key passage, "It has been the greatest honour of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will," he says, "speak to the nation later in the week in more detail about my decision." What a decision, and what a question now. What happens next? Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
It's Justin at close to midnight in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
Hello, it's Sarah here in the Bureau in Washington, D.C.
Hello, it's Mariana, a.k.a. Misinformation, not in the worldwide headquarters, but still on my holidays in Greece.
And it's Adam from your sister podcast, Newscast. And of course, this is actually the worldwide headquarters of Newscast, as far as I experience it. But I noticed tonight it's got your cushions and your graphics. But okay. I think, yes, it's the day to change the artwork. Sarah, what happens when a massive story like this breaks on a Sunday morning, and a lot of it's happening on social media?
Well, you have to jump in the shower very, very quickly and rush into work and stay across social media, because this was a story that almost entirely played out there. First, obviously, that statement from Joe Biden saying that he wasn't going to seek re-election. And it was by staying glued to your phone and across social media that we saw the messages of support coming in for Kamala Harris, and the fact that Joe Biden was backing Kamala Harris to be his vice president. All of the people congratulating Mr. Biden on everything he's achieved in office and on his decision to step down, people calling him a great patriot, for instance, to choosing to do that. Everybody doing it by statement. And I have to say, the flurry that came in so fast for Kamala Harris did look as though some people maybe had been ready for this moment. But it was exciting as it unfolded. But we still actually haven't really heard from very many people at all.
And also, Justin, what's weird for me as an observer of this stuff is that American politics and constitutional life is normally so visual and based around events and like an address from the Oval Office. This is all just seems to be sort of happening in the ether.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so thoroughly dishonest, because you've got an absolute tsunami now of people saying Joe Biden was wonderful, he's just done the right thing and all the rest of it. And actually, behind the scenes, they've been getting angrier and angrier and more frustrated, and have been for some time. And there's been this vicious battle going on. And the fact is that a lot of them think that all of this has happened too late. On the business of set piece events, they're all kind of wondering what to do next. And obviously the wind is in Kamala Harris's sails, no question about that. And I'd be really surprised if anyone serious stood against her. But they've still got to work out kind of the logistics, actually, the physical logistics. I don't know, Sarah, is this true? Does she carry on? Do we know yet whether she carries on with her campaign engagements for this week? Does she have a pause? What actually happens? Do we know?
I imagine she would carry on, because it's perfectly set for her that she's already getting out there on the campaign trail. And of course, she can appear just as the vice presidential candidate, as the vice president. Very interesting. I don't know if you spotted this, Justin, as all of these statements were going out, quite rightly, as you say, eulogizing Joe Biden and his presidency. His campaign quietly went off to the FEC, the Federal Electoral Commission, and changed the name of the campaign from the Biden-Harris campaign just to the Harris campaign. That's another clear marker of what direction he says he wants this to go in. It'll be a few days, I guess, before we know if anybody will put their hat in the ring to challenge Kamala. But the way things have been moving in such a smooth and coordinated fashion after this surprise announcement, it looks to me as though there's a lot of people hoping the party will just coalesce around her, and I assume extreme pressure on other candidates not to stand.
What's the picture online, Mariana?
I think it's really interesting what you all said about how this did very much kind of break online and unfold online, because, and we've chatted about it a few times on Americast, but I've always kind of said, well, the day that Twitter, or X as we now call it, dies is the day when people no longer post their statements there, when it's not the place that people turn to kind of issue their official. And today, if anything, it's kind of like brought it back to...
Great day to be
brought it
Elon
even more
Musk.
back to life. Yeah, well, exactly. And it is the place where still the president of the United States, the current president, or a range of politicians post their statements, share what they think, and they're able to bypass the media in that way and communicate directly with the people that follow them, social media users. That can be positive thing and good for them. It can also be a negative thing and not so good. I mean, the way I learned about this, the same, was kind of opening up my feed on X, and just right at the top there was that Joe Biden statement. And then suddenly I thought, right, okay, I need to log on to all the undercover voters. And lo and behold, on almost all of their feeds on X, regardless of their political views, whether they're the left-leaning ones or the right-leaning ones, it was that statement that has just sort of taken over X. And then almost immediately you feel the kind of partisan earthquake happening. And the people that are very pro-Democrat, or the people who are very pro-Republican and specifically very pro-Donald Trump, start tweeting out the kind of different positions that they have, e.g., as you were saying, that, Joe Biden's had a really honourable career, really distinguished political career. This is the right thing to do, and so on. And then you've obviously got the kind of Republican side who started pushing out this kind of repeated narrative of, well, hang on a second, why is he going to stay as the president until November if he's not even able to run as president?
Yeah, although
in
that
November?
actually is a really good point. I mean, I'm not saying they're right, but they're right to bring it up because, frankly, I mean, I think a lot of people, Adam, kind of assume that Joe Biden is president somehow until the election in the kind of way that we do it in Britain. But that ain't the case.
It's the second week of January.
He's president of the second week of January. There is a long way to go. And seriously, if he is in the kind of decline that has brought this decision on him, really, are they saying that he should stay in post?
Although an incumbent president saying that they're not going to run for re-election, that's a fairly big historic thing. But a president actually resigning from the office is like historic plus, isn't it?
Yeah, but we do plus on
supersized,
Yeah.
supersized historic moment. Let's return to whether Kamala Harris actually has it in the bag in a second. But I just wanted to just reflect a bit on how we got here. Justin, do you think there will be one thing or one person that finally got to Joe Biden and made him make this decision? Or is it a combination of all the things we've been talking about ever since, even before that disastrous debate?
Yeah, so the event was the debate. There's no question about that, because it then became obvious to a lot of people, well, to everyone really. But I think the big point to make is that all the political class who suddenly realised this after the debate were only catching up with the American people who knew this a long time ago and were saying it a long time ago and were telling pollsters a long time ago, Democrat and Republican. So in a sense, you've got a weird situation where the political class is now caught up very, very late with what people knew perfectly well with their own eyes. So the big event was the debate, and the big person was Barack Obama. There's no question about that. And it's complicated, and their relationship is weird, and never quite worked out when Obama was president and Biden was VP. They never really quite worked out who was in charge. Formally, Obama, obviously, but informally, Biden, the older man, all the rest of it, with all the experience, and that's why he was there. So they have this kind of weird relationship. But once it was leaked that Obama wanted him to go, I think that was the thing that different.
The other most significant thing, though, I would say, Adam, is Nancy Pelosi, who was the Democrat Speaker of the House of Representatives for years and years and years, and is still in politics, although she stood down from that post. She's a very, very close ally of Joe Biden's, but she also has her ear to the ground with the Democratic caucus in a way very, very few people do. She is a masterful politician, and she's very, very good at counting votes. She got on to Joe Biden and said she was worried that he was going to lose to Donald Trump because he had convinced himself he was the one person who could beat Donald Trump. And in some reports of one phone call, he was saying, no, he was still sure that he had a path to victory. And so she demanded that his pollster get on the line and start explaining the numbers properly to Joe Biden, because there has been a fear for quite a while in Washington that he wasn't being shown the really bad polling evidence that there was, that he was digging his heels in, saying he could continue and that he could win, because he hadn't seen what the rest of us had, which was the numbers showing that it was going to be very, very difficult.
Oh, so it wasn't stubbornness on his part. It was just not having the actual information to reach a rational judgment, potentially.
Well, both, because he's famously stubborn as well. And when his back's against the wall, that's when he really, really, really will dig in. And some of the people who were telling him to go, that will have really grated. He has not forgiven Barack Obama for pushing him aside in 2016. He was the vice president. The nomination should have been his, he thought. Instead, Barack Obama got Hillary Clinton into place. And what did she do? Well, she lost to Donald Trump, didn't she? And then 4 years later, Joe Biden managed to beat him. So, I mean, there is quite a lot of bitterness there with both the Barack Obama camp and the Clintons camp, in fact, but with that complicated relationship with Joe Biden.
Not to fixate on the timing, because what matters is the content of the decision, and the timing is basically just a thing about journalists having their plans ruined. Like Wolf Blitzer from CNN was in a bar posting a picture of him drinking a cocktail named after himself. So any ideas for
we've all been there.
A Fleming
I bet
Rita?
Mariana's almost certainly got a cocktail named after her in front of her now.
But is there anything
sadly.
Is there anything other than like political momentum and pressure building that explains why this happened at this point? Is there something about, is it about he didn't want to do it when the markets were open so you don't see like an effect on the stock market? Or is there something about the actual, this moment where we are in the electoral process that something was about to happen? Or is it just actually, this is the point he made the decision?
Well, there's a full diary coming up this week in Washington, slightly curtailed, of course, because Joe Biden is still isolating with COVID at his beach house in Rehoboth in Delaware. But he is due back. On Wednesday, he's supposed to be meeting Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. On Tuesday, he's meeting Netanyahu at the White House. On Wednesday, Netanyahu is addressing Congress. So there is a big political week coming up. And he couldn't, I think, go into those kind of very, very important international meetings if the only question anybody was asking was whether or not he was going to stand down. I think he had to clarify it in order to concentrate on the Middle East without being distracted by all of this as well. But also the number of people who were weighing in, more and more senators who were worried about losing their seats if Joe Biden's at the top of the ticket. The pressure was weighing in as well.
Right, let's go back to the issue about Kamala Harris and whether she's now got the nomination in the bag. It's just so interesting seeing just there in black and white the Clintons doing a joint statement saying, yeah, it's got to be her, she's great. And then Obama saying, oh, I really hope our leaders can come up with a process that leads to the right person being selected.
Yeah.
What do you reckon's going on there? Well, it's pretty obvious.
Well, and then changing his mind and then basically coming out for her.
Right.
Same with Jim Clyburn, who is not a household name, but a really important guy on the Democratic side, African-American congressman from South Carolina, the person who won it for Biden, won the nomination for Biden when he won the presidency. And Jim Clyburn was saying a few days ago, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jim Clyburn was sort of hinting a few days ago that actually he could see an open process where there were several people who threw their hats into the ring. But as soon as Biden made his statement today, Clyburn's on board for Kamala Harris. So, I mean, Sarah, we are not doubting, are we, that it is going to be Kamala Harris and no serious person is going to run against her. Can we say that certainly?
I think it's extremely unlikely. And yeah, it does. Basically, it looks as though it has been stitched up. And there are people who are very worried about that looked like an anti-democratic process, that sort of elites in Washington were going to be choosing who the next nominee was, because obviously there isn't time to go through a primary process where Democratic voters would get to choose their candidate. So, but just having somebody imposed from the top, there were people who thought the optics of that were going to be very bad, and that you could generate much more excitement and much more attention if you had a competitive process. And then we all went to Chicago in a month's time and saw the delegates battling it out on the floor, voting in an open contest. Now, it would certainly be exciting for us. There was an idea to energise the electorate.
But things that are exciting for us are not necessarily good for people, let's be frank.
And Mariana, I mean, you went to the primaries at the start of the year, and okay, the Democratic primary wasn't really a contest; it was the Republican one where it was interesting. But I do just wonder, how are people reacting to the fact that something that they take very seriously, that kind of the primary process, the direct democracy, has just looks like a bit of a sham, actually, because it's actually just some rich, powerful people can do a backroom deal now.
It's interesting because in some ways, like, a lot of that plays into some of the narratives that very much exist on social media around, this idea of, elites, powerful people being able to decide what happens without necessarily consulting the public, the voters, and so on. I haven't actually seen as much of that so far as I thought. I've been looking at my undercover voters' social media feeds, my fictional characters, to see what they're being recommended. And that hasn't been the kind of overriding narrative. I think, if anything, quite interestingly, and often, you know, this is the case because the conversation on social media is quite detached from the intricacies of the democratic process. Like, it really struck me when we were at the caucuses, Justin and I, and Sarah as well, in Iowa, how different that felt from like the TikTok feeds of my undercover voters. Like, those two things felt absolutely worlds apart, and in some ways quite different audiences as well. But what's really struck me, you know, we chatted about it the other day, Justin and Adam, about the kind of reception to Kamala Harris on social media, a lot of which has been quite negative and quite mocking, people kind of making fun of clips of her. There's been this real sort of positive surge on my undercover voters feeds, and particularly on the left-leaning ones. So Progressive Left Emma, for example, her TikTok feed, a lot of the clips of Kamala Harris that have been resurfacing are some of the ones that have become very, very, very memeable. So the coconut tree one, for example, where Kamala Harris at a speech she's giving last year kind of said something along the lines of, oh, you know, you haven't just fallen from a coconut tree, you're part of the context. You know, you're
no,
kind of attached to the
crucially,
context around you.
She was wasn't she quoting like her grandma or her some advice that she'd been given? So it's not actually her phrase, the infamous coconut tree thing. It's somebody else that said it to her.
But it's like a clip of her saying that phrase that has totally taken off on social media, particularly in recent weeks, and that has again sort of started to really pop up on the social media feeds of my undercover voters. And initially, it was obviously used to kind of take aim at her, to say, oh, what is she talking about here? This doesn't make any sense, to mock her. But now the way it's resurfacing is kind of like, oh, actually, I kind of get what she means here. This is great. I really like her. And there's this internet phenomena at the moment called Brat Summer, which basically, Justin, who probably won't know this, is about Charlie XCX, who's a musician, a pop star. She's got this album out at the moment, and there are all kinds of, it's like this bright green kind of meme, so to speak, and people reshare stuff that would be perceived as being Brat Summer. And interestingly, Kamala Harris and that quote, the one about the coconut tree, has now started being kind of shared in the Brat Summer format, which I think speaks to, and all of that is so many layers of meme. I'm sorry if I've lost any Americasters or newscasters.
You certainly lost
process.
me, if it's any help. But then that was your intention.
I'll take you, Justin. I'll take you down to HMV after we recorded this.
Another time. I look forward to it. Just also on thinking about Kamala Harris, though, Mariana, and maybe Sarah as well in a second. It is really important now who she chooses as her vice presidential candidate, isn't it? For me, it is absolutely obvious she has to choose Josh Shapiro, who is the very, very successful presidential, very, very successful governor of Pennsylvania. He is a Democrat. He behaved, I thought, impeccably after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which happened in his state. He is a very, very safe pair of hands and a very, very effective communicator. And here's my crucial point, they absolutely have to win Pennsylvania. If she and her running mate do not win Pennsylvania, they will not win this election. It seems to me that is hugely important. That is why she almost certainly has to choose him. But I don't know, Mariana, first, are we into vice presidential choices yet online?
To your dismay, Justin, TikTok is still very much in its Brat Summer phase, not in its vice president. But I think there's an important point here, which is the reason I kind of told that very long-winded explanation of the meme is because I think it speaks to Kamala Harris's ability, perhaps in a way that might be slightly unanticipated, to cut through online and to both incite and encourage lots of support, and then also people that don't like her at all. And a lot of the comments I've seen and the videos that have popped up on the undercover voters feeds, particularly the left-leaning ones, have focused on the fact that she is a woman, that she is a black woman, and have been very supportive of that fact. And so I think whoever she chooses from a kind of demographics point of view is quite interesting. Does she run with another woman? Does she run with a man, like you say, Justin? Does she, I'd be really interested to kind of see how that is perceived, but I don't think that social media's got there quite yet.
I agree with you, Justin, that she should choose someone who will help her win one of the key swing states, and Josh Shapiro would be a very good choice. Not the only one, though. J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, really, really good debater, punchy politician who could bring quite a lot to the ticket, I think. Or if you want to win North Carolina, which would be a very, very good idea for Democrats, Roy Cooper, the governor there, another perfectly plausible running mate, I think. But I think we're agreed, Justin, it's the same kind of thing that she's looking for. I think she might need somebody to bring a lot of the party and activists with her as well, though, because if you remember when she ran for president herself, when she was challenging in 2020 and Joe Biden won the nomination,
hopelessly
she
badly.
didn't stand for very much. She didn't really seem to have a good argument as to why she was running for president. And I don't think that's improved during the time she's been in the White House. I'll tell you what somebody said to me over a drink the other day. And this was somebody who was actively trying to get Joe Biden to drop out of the race and who really wanted a different candidate. And if it had to be Kamala, then they would settle for Kamala, despite calling her an empty suit with no ideological rudder and no moral compass.
And yet, you could say of her, and this is an interesting thing, Adam, which I just wonder, you have a very, very short opportunity when you're running for president to introduce yourself to the American people and to convince them that you are a character who is worthy of support and consideration. And that has now been truncated to almost nothing in this campaign. And I just wonder whether she can get across a few key points. Like, for instance, she is a former prosecutor. He, Donald Trump, is a felon. She is someone who's always supported abortion rights. Abortion rights are on the ballot very much so this time round. Just a few punchy things that can hit home could maybe get her back. She did this disastrous interview quite soon after she and Biden took office, where she was given the southern border to deal with, to solve, an absolutely thankless task. And she did an interview, and the interviewer said, "Have you ever been?" And she, instead of saying, "Well, no, but I'm going to go soon," she just kind of hummed and hawed and said, "Oh, yeah, well, that's a silly question. You shouldn't be asking me that." And then she said, do you remember this, Sarah? She said, "Well, I haven't been to Europe either." Yes. And it was such a sort of politically hopelessly bad thing to say. But what people who support her say, and I've been quite a detractor of hers in the past, just because I just felt she wasn't a serious political figure, in spite of her obvious abilities and all the rest of it. What they're saying now is if she hones it down to just these few things, and actually she could be a more serious candidate than certainly the Trump people feel that she would be.
And they'll have lots of racist and misogynistic stuff to throw at her as well. So it could get a little bit nasty. But that stuff can backfire as well, of course. They're already blaming her for the crisis on the southern border. And that's one of their strongest issues. So that is going to be a bit of a problem. She's going to have to work out what the answer to having been given some responsibility for that and immigration across that border, illegal immigration having reached absolute record highs. That's something she's going to deal with.
Are we going to be in a world for the next few months where Biden is the weekend president and actually Kamala's the weekday president doing all the work, and there's lots of opportunities for her to be on the steps of Air Force One so that people don't even really have to imagine her being president? They sort of see her doing it already. Yeah. Can you fiddle the actual duties, the carve up of the duties between the two of them?
Well, but hang on, just before you expand on that point, I do think it is possible, at least, that not via the 25th Amendment, which is when a president is incapable, but actually I wonder whether there is another shoe to drop, which is that Biden is not capable of carrying on, and she actually does become president before the election, which of course is possible and would then throw the whole thing into a new level of madness.
And your predictive record on this subject is going to be pretty good, so I'm listening particularly carefully to that.
Right.
I mean,
50%
that's mean, man. That's
half wrong, but also half right. But the other thing I was going to say is that the tension is so many people in the UK, at least, understand what Kamala Harris does via the TV show Veep. And it's like, that is fictional and it's very funny. And sometimes real life is stranger than fiction. But I just wonder if the next few months is going to be a tussle between, does Kamala end up more Veepish or more presidential? And it's actually, that will play out visually in front of us.
And what does Trump do, Sarah? I mean, we know you've just told us what he's saying at the moment, and the Trump campaign they're going to try and pin Joe Biden's weaknesses on Kamala Harris and say she was part of the team that was hiding it from the American people, et cetera, which, may or may not be true. But longer term, I mean, do you think he still has that debate that they're due to have in September? How do they alter the Trump campaign, if indeed they do, if indeed they can?
Well, that's a very good point about the debate. Yes, of course, because that was accepted, I guess, by the Biden-Harris campaign. We'll see if she turns up for that. That would be fascinating, wouldn't it? Trump will want to do it, I would imagine, because he's very confident about his debate performance now. And actually, I mean, Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance were hammering out dates for a vice presidential debate. She'll have to pick somebody and put them up against Vance. And in fact, Justin, your predictive record, not too bad. I've just seen come in Josh Shapiro, whom you were talking about, the Pennsylvania governor, whom you're recommending to Kamala as her vice presidential candidate. He has just endorsed her in the most fulsome terms and says the best path forward for the Democratic Party is to quickly unite behind Vice President Harris. So, so he's making his pitch there. But, I mean, the Trump campaign have been ready for this, but they didn't want it. I mean, they really did want to run against Joe Biden, who they saw as so incredibly weakened. It was going to be very, very easy for them. They need to pivot a bit on this. But they've, for a couple of years, been rather demonizing Kamala Harris anyway, because they were always saying if you vote for Joe Biden, the chances are he won't survive another full term and you'll end up with Vice President Harris. And they had managed to make that sound like a scary prospect to a lot of their supporters.
And Justin, does Donald Trump now become the old guy by default?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, he is now the oldest presidential candidate in American history. And they will pin it on him all that they can. And of course, he too has signs of decline. And he's just given, I thought he was, Sarah will laugh at me because I only really watched the beginning of his speech because it was the middle of the night here and I had to do my Today programme stuff. But I was quite impressed by him. And then Sarah...
You missed the Hannibal Lecter bit.
I missed Hannibal Lecter. Sarah then had to point out to me on our Americast episode that actually it hadn't gone according to plan later on in the speech, which is a fair point to make. But... He was quite disciplined there. But then he made another speech. I can't remember where it was, Sarah, but he made another speech in which he was back to all the old kind of craziness. And he says things, not only that aren't true, he says things that are quite difficult to grasp what he's talking about. And if that happens more over the coming months, then who knows what position he'll be in.
Right. Well, the position we're in is that we've come to the end of this breaking extra Sunday night episode. It's nearly 11:30. And yeah, there's still so much I actually want to know about what's going to happen. But I guess I'll just have to listen to Americast for the next 5 months. So thanks for having me this evening. Sarah, good luck chasing all of this over the next few days.
Thank you. Speak to you soon, I hope.
Mariana, you're actually on holiday.
Very unsuccessfully, but no, it's okay. I love it really.
So please do have a break at some point.
Mariana, take 10 minutes off.
I'll try.
And
when my undercover voters aren't charged.
To Americasters and newscasters as well, do get in touch. I haven't got written down the various numbers, but you'll know.
Oh, but I know them. So the email address obviously is newscast@bbc.co.uk, or I'm guessing Americast@bbc.co.uk. Do you have the password for that inbox?
Yeah.
And the WhatsApp number, if you're in the UK, is 0330 123 9480. And if you're outside the UK, that's +44 at the start there. But anyway, thank you for joining us, because that's now the end of this episode. Bye.
Bye.
Americast from BBC News.